The year is 431 BCE. In the heart of Athens, marble columns gleam under the Mediterranean sun. Philosophers debate justice in the agora. Citizens cast votes in the world's first democracy. This is the Athens your history books celebrate. But step into the shadows of those same marble buildings. Descend beneath the golden city. Here, in chambers carved from living rock, a different truth echoes through the darkness. The screams of women, thousands of them, tortured, broken, forgotten. For every free citizen debating philosophy above, 10 enslaved souls suffered below. Half of them were women. Their bodies were currency. Their pain was profit. Their deaths were entertainment. In just moments, you'll witness punishments so brutal that ancient writers themselves refused to record them. Methods of torture that would make medieval inquisitors recoil in horror. And you'll discover why every textbook, every museum, every university course has buried this truth for over 2,000 years. What I'm about to show you will shatter everything you thought you knew about the birthplace of civilization. Because the golden age of Athens? It was built on a foundation of screaming women. Welcome to Throne of Lies, where we tear away civilization's golden masks to reveal the blood-soaked truth beneath. Athens, the birthplace of democracy, the cradle of civilization, the shining beacon of human enlightenment. Every school child learns this story. Every history professor teaches it. Every museum celebrates it. They're all lying to you. Let me give you the real numbers. In this supposed paradise of freedom, only 10 to 15% of the population could vote. Only free adult males held citizenship. That means in a city of 250,000 people, fewer than 30,000 had any rights at all. The rest? Over 100,000 human beings lived as property. 40% of Athens was enslaved. Nearly half the population existed to serve the whims of their masters. And among these enslaved masses, women faced a special kind of hell. Even free women in Athens had no rights. They couldn't vote, couldn't own property, couldn't speak in court. They were legal minors for their entire lives, passed from father to husband like livestock. But enslaved women? They weren't even considered human. The machine that fed Athens its endless supply of human misery operated with ruthless efficiency. Women became slaves through 3 primary channels. War provided the largest harvest. When Athenian armies conquered a city, every woman and child became spoils of war. Debt claimed thousands more. A single bad harvest could force a desperate father to sell his daughter to feed his sons. And birth sealed the fate of countless others. If your mother was enslaved, you were born property. The slave markets of Athens operated like any other business. Every month, fresh shipments of human cargo arrived at the port of Piraeus. The auctioneers knew their trade well. They understood that young women commanded the highest prices. A 15-year-old girl from Thrace could sell for 1,200 drachmas. A battle-hardened warrior might fetch only 800. The buyers weren't just wealthy aristocrats. Middle-class citizens, craftsmen, even small farmers saved their silver to purchase human beings. The slave markets offered payment plans, rent-to-own arrangements, volume discounts for bulk purchases. Most of these women came from the northern territories. Thrace supplied the largest numbers. The Scythian steppes provided others. Traders brought shipments from Asia Minor, from the Black Sea colonies, from anywhere Athenian influence could reach. These women spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, came from different cultures. But in Athens, they all shared the same fate. If this hidden history shocks you, imagine what else they've concealed. Hit subscribe to help Throne of Lies reach 1,000 subscribers and expose more buried truths. These women deserve to have their stories told. Once you were sold, your fate depended entirely on who bought you. 3 categories of enslavement awaited these women. Each promised its own unique form of suffering. The domestic slaves, called oikotai, made up the largest group. These women disappeared into private homes across Athens. From the outside, these households looked respectable. Wealthy citizens discussing politics over wine. Children learning their letters from tutors. The perfect image of civilized life. Inside those same homes, women worked 18 hours a day without rest. They slept on kitchen floors, on hallway stones, wherever exhaustion finally claimed them. Food was scraps from their master's table. Water was what remained after the family had bathed. But the work was only the beginning. Every master held absolute sexual rights over his female slaves. Legal documents from the period make this clear. A slave woman's body belonged to her owner as completely as his furniture or his cattle. Resistance brought swift punishment. Red-hot irons branded faces and arms. Whips tore flesh from bones. Isolation chambers broke minds and spirits. When these women became pregnant, as they inevitably did, the children born from rape became the master's property too. Motherhood offered no protection, no rest, no mercy. Pregnancy was simply another form of production. Another way to increase the household's wealth. The industrial slaves faced different horrors. Thousands of women disappeared into the silver mines at Laurium, 30 miles southeast of Athens. These mines funded Athens' golden age. They paid for the Parthenon, the fleet, the armies that spread Athenian power across the Mediterranean. The women who worked those mines never saw daylight. They descended into tunnels barely wide enough for a human body. They crawled through passages choked with dust and poisonous gases. They hauled baskets of silver or through narrow shafts until their backs bent permanently, until their lungs filled with metal dust, until they collapsed and died in the darkness. The textile workshops were no kinder. Hundreds of women worked in windowless rooms, spinning thread and weaving cloth for 16 hours without break. Their fingers bled from the rough wool. Their eyes went blind from straining in dim light. Guards watched constantly. Any pause brought beatings. Any mistake brought worse. The pottery workshops, the metalworking shops, the countless small industries that made Athens wealthy, all of them ran on the blood and sweat of enslaved women. The average lifespan after enslavement was 8 to 12 years. Most died before they reached 30. But perhaps the cruelest fate awaited the temple slaves, the hierules. These women served in Athens' most sacred spaces. The temples that housed the city's gods also housed its most profitable businesses. Sacred prostitution, they called it, a religious cover for systematic rape. The temple of Aphrodite alone held over 1,000 enslaved women. Men came not just from Athens, but from across the Greek world to purchase what the priests called divine favor. These women endured ritual abuse disguised as religious ceremony. They were forced to participate in festivals that celebrated their own degradation. They were made to smile while being violated, to pretend gratitude for their suffering, to thank the gods for their slavery. The temples operated as massive brothel enterprises. They generated enormous wealth for the priests and enormous tax revenue for the city. Religious law protected these operations from interference. Divine sanction made every form of abuse not just legal but holy. Athenian law was precise about one thing. Enslaved women were not human beings. They were objects, property, assets to be bought, sold, damaged, or destroyed at their owner's discretion. The legal code spelled this out in cold detail. A slave could not testify in court unless under torture. The law assumed that only extreme physical pain could force truth from inferior beings. This torture was called basanos. It was not punishment. It was procedure. Picture an Athenian courtroom. A wealthy citizen accuses his neighbor of theft. The only witness is an enslaved woman who saw the crime. But her word means nothing. Her testimony counts for nothing, unless she speaks while screaming. So they stretch her on the rack. They apply burning metal to her flesh. They break her bones systematically until she tells them what they want to hear. The judges nod approvingly. This is justice. This is civilized law. The master's power over his slaves was absolute. Legal documents grant him the right to kill, to maim, to torture, to sell without cause or explanation. No court could question his decisions. No law could limit his authority. If he wanted to beat a woman to death for looking at him wrong, that was his legal right. If you killed someone else's slave, however, you faced consequences. Not for murder, for property damage. The penalty was financial compensation to the owner, like replacing a broken vase or a dead horse. The amount depended on the slave's value. not the brutality of the killing. The punishment system operated with methodical cruelty. Minor infractions brought whipping, not the quick lashes you see in movies. Extended sessions with special whips designed to tear flesh without killing immediately. Food deprivation could last for weeks. Chaining was permanent. Heavy iron shackles that left deep grooves in ankle bones, that made walking agony, that marked a woman as troublesome for life. Moderate offenses brought branding. Red-hot iron pressed into faces, arms, breasts. The scars announced the woman's crimes to every future owner. Sexual humiliation was systematic. Public rape in the agora. Forced nakedness during religious festivals. Degradation designed to break not just bodies, but souls. Limb damage was surgical. Precise cuts to tendons that left arms useless or legs crippled. The goal was not death, but permanent disability that served as constant reminder of the consequences of defiance. Major crimes brought punishments that test the limits of human imagination. Mutilation that left women barely recognizable as human. Torture sessions that lasted for days. And family separation, the cruelest punishment of all. Mothers forced to watch their children sold to distant cities. Sisters torn apart and scattered across the Mediterranean. Husbands and wives who would never see each other again. The law protected these practices. The courts enforced them. The citizens applauded them. This was not the exception in Athens. This was the rule. This was the legal foundation upon which democracy was built. While free men debated philosophy in marble halls, the screams of tortured women echoed from every basement, every workshop, every temple in the city. The law was clear. The procedures were established. The punishments were legal. And no one, absolutely no one, would speak for the women who suffered them. The records that survive from ancient Athens reveal a systematic approach to punishment that went far beyond simple discipline. These were calculated methods designed to break human beings completely. The scourging post stood in every major household and workshop. Archaeological evidence shows these wooden structures, stained dark with blood, positioned where other slaves would be forced to watch. The instrument of choice was called the flagrum. Multiple leather strips embedded with pieces of metal and bone, designed not for quick punishment, but for maximum tissue damage. The ancient writer Xenophon describes marketplace demonstrations where masters would publicly whip their slaves. These weren't spontaneous acts of anger. They were calculated displays of power, scheduled events designed to terrorize the entire enslaved population. The message was clear. This could happen to anyone at any time for any reason. Medical texts from the period describe the aftermath of these sessions. Permanent scarring that left geometric patterns across backs and limbs. Infections that killed slowly and painfully. Nerve damage that left women unable to feel sensation in their extremities for the rest of their lives. Branding served multiple purposes. The red-hot iron pressed into foreheads marked repeat offenders permanently. Future buyers would know immediately that this woman had caused trouble before. The practice was so common that specific symbols developed. A circle for theft, a cross for attempted escape, stars for violence against masters. For those who tried to run, hamstringing was the preferred solution. A quick cut to the large tendon behind the ankle left the leg permanently damaged. The woman could still work, but running became impossible. Surgical texts described the procedure in clinical detail. It was performed without any form of pain relief. Repeat offenses brought facial mutilation. Nose removal was standard for women caught stealing food. Ear removal marked those who had been caught listening to forbidden conversations. The goal was not just punishment, but permanent identification. These women would carry their crimes on their faces for life. Partial blinding served economic purposes. Removing one eye left enough vision for most types of work, but destroyed depth perception needed for escape attempts. Masters calculated these punishments precisely. Maximum control with minimum loss of productivity. The sexual violence was systematic. Multiple assailants were assigned by design, not convenience. The goal was complete psychological destruction. Ancient contracts specify that certain categories of punishment include gang assault as standard procedure. Breeding programs operated like livestock management. Women of childbearing age were assigned to male slaves specifically to produce the next generation of workers. Pregnancy offered no protection from violence. Ancient medical texts describe techniques for beating pregnant women without damaging the unborn child. The woman's suffering was irrelevant. Only the future slave mattered. Newborns were removed within days of birth. Mothers never held their children, never nursed them, never spoke to them. The separation was immediate and permanent. Child rearing was handled by designated wet nurses who were themselves enslaved. Perhaps the cruelest punishments targeted the mind rather than the body. Family separation was the ultimate weapon. Selling children to distant cities where mothers would never see them again. Splitting couples who had found love even in slavery. These sales were often announced weeks in advance, forcing families to live with the knowledge of their approaching destruction. False hope was weaponized systematically. Masters would promise freedom to slaves who performed exceptional service, then revoke those promises at the last moment. Some women lived for years believing their liberation was imminent, only to discover they had been deceived deliberately. Forced betrayal broke community bonds. Masters would order one slave to punish another, turning victims against each other. Friends were forced to brand friends. Mothers were ordered to whip their own daughters. Resistance to these orders brought death. Religious mockery added spiritual torment to physical suffering. Women were forced to participate in festivals celebrating their own enslavement. They were made to sing hymns praising their masters as divine beings. They were required to perform in religious dramas that depicted their subjugation as natural and just. These women endured unimaginable horror so Athens could build its golden age. Their pain built the Parthenon. Their blood funded the philosophers. Their deaths purchased the marble that tourists admire today. If their stories matter to you, subscribe to Throne of Lies and help us honor their memory by reaching 1,000 subscribers. They deserve to be remembered. Behind every statistic lies a human face. Behind every number lies a name. The women who suffered in Athens were not anonymous masses. They were individuals with stories, with dreams, with lives that were stolen from them. 3 cases illuminate the horror with perfect clarity. Her name was Rhodopis. She had been a Thracian princess, daughter of a minor king in the northern mountains. 14 years old when Athenian raiders struck her father's palace. Beautiful beyond measure, with golden hair that caught sunlight like spun metal. The slavers knew immediately they had captured something valuable. The merchant who bought her treated her like a prized possession at first. Fine clothes, perfumed baths, delicate foods. He displayed her at dinner parties like a living sculpture. Guests would offer enormous sums to purchase her. The merchant always refused. She was his masterpiece. But Rhodopis remembered who she had been. She carried herself like royalty because she was royalty. She spoke to her master as an equal because in her mind, she remained a princess. This confidence, this refusal to be broken, eventually enraged him. The first punishment came when she corrected his pronunciation of her native language in front of guests. 20 lashes with the flagrum. The scars never fully healed. The second came when she refused to perform a degrading dance for his entertainment. Branding on her left shoulder, a mark that burned for weeks. Each act of defiance brought escalating brutality. The merchant became obsessed with breaking her spirit. 3 years of systematic torture followed. Beatings that left her unconscious for days. Burns that destroyed the beauty he had once treasured. Sexual assaults that grew more violent with each resistance. The final punishment came when she attempted escape. Recapture meant mutilation. Her master ordered her hamstrung, then infected the wounds deliberately by packing them with filth. Gangrene set in within days. She died screaming his name, not in submission, but in defiance. Even death could not break Princess Rhodopis of Thrace. 2,000 women disappeared into the silver mines at Laurium. The wealth that built the Parthenon came from holes in the earth where human beings crawled like insects through tunnels barely wide enough for their bodies. These women worked in conditions that defied human endurance. Underground for months at a time, chained together in groups of 20. They hauled baskets of silver or through passages that grew narrower with each level. The air grew thinner, more poisonous, more deadly the deeper they went. Fresh water was rationed. 1 cup per woman per day. Food was bread so stale it had to be soaked in whatever liquid was available. The women grew skeletal within weeks. Their hair fell out from mineral poisoning. Their teeth loosened and dropped from their mouths. But the most terrifying punishment awaited those who tried to organize resistance. Cave-in punishment was deliberate, calculated murder. Guards would identify the tunnel section where troublemakers worked, then systematically weaken the support beams. The collapse would kill dozens instantly while appearing accidental. Fragments of testimony survive from women who were later freed or sold to other masters. Their words paint a picture of hell carved from living rock. One account describes the sound the mines made at night. Not silence, but constant weeping. 2,000 women crying simultaneously in languages from across the known world. Another describes the bodies. When women died, and they died constantly, their corpses were left chained to the survivors. The living had to drag the dead through the tunnels until guards decided to remove them. Sometimes this took days. The smell, the weight, the horror of working beside rotting flesh broke minds as surely as whips broke backs. A third account tells of the pregnant women in the mines. Pregnancy meant no relief from the work, but also no access to midwives or medical care when birth came. Women gave birth in the tunnels alone, still chained to their work groups. Most babies died within hours. The mothers were expected to return to hauling or immediately. The testimony is fragmentary because most of these women never survived to tell their stories. The average lifespan in the Laurium mines was 6 months. 2,000 women entered. Archaeological evidence suggests fewer than 50 ever emerged alive. Yet some did survive long enough to bear witness. Their words, preserved in legal documents and personal letters, provide the only evidence of what happened in those tunnels. They remembered names. They remembered faces. They remembered the women who died beside them in the darkness, forgotten by history but not by those who shared their suffering. Every scream had a price. Every drop of blood generated profit. The torture of enslaved women was not cruelty for its own sake. It was business. Cold, calculated, and extraordinarily profitable business. The financial records that survive from ancient Athens reveal the economic logic behind the brutality. A healthy young woman cost 1,200 drachmas at auction. But a trained slave, one who had been broken through systematic punishment, could be resold for 1,800 drachmas. The profit margin on human suffering was 50%. Masters kept detailed ledgers of punishment costs versus productivity gains. 20 lashes increased work output by an average of 30% for 6 months. The cost of the whip, the time spent administering punishment, the risk of permanent damage, all calculated against increased profit. Torture was not emotional. It was mathematical. Replacement costs made extreme punishment economically sensible. If a woman died from her injuries, a new slave could be purchased for roughly the same price. But if she survived and learned absolute obedience, her value increased dramatically. The equation was simple. Break them or replace them. Either way, the master profited. The breeding programs operated like livestock management. Detailed records show which combinations of male and female slaves produced the strongest offspring, which genetic lines showed more resistance to disease, which bloodlines demonstrated better work capacity. Women were assigned to breeding partners based on these calculations, not personal choice or human emotion. A pregnant slave woman represented pure profit. The child belonged to the master from birth. No purchase cost, no transport fees, no auction expenses. Just 9 months of waiting for free labor to arrive. Medical texts describe techniques for maximizing slave pregnancy rates while minimizing care costs. The woman's health mattered only as it affected the unborn worker. Athens exported this misery across the Mediterranean. Trained slaves, broken and compliant, commanded premium prices in foreign markets. Ships left Piraeus regularly carrying human cargo to Sparta, Corinth, Rome, and beyond. The reputation of Athenian slave-breaking techniques made their products highly sought after. The export economy generated enormous tax revenue for the city. 10% of every slave sale went directly into the public treasury. The same money that funded public works projects, religious festivals, and military campaigns came from the systematic torture of human beings. The Parthenon was built with blood money. But the profit system required more than just masters and slaves. It needed the participation of every free citizen in Athens. And it got it. Ordinary Athenians invested in slave-worked businesses. They bought shares in mining operations, textile workshops, and temple brothels. Middle-class citizens who could never afford to own slaves directly could still profit from their suffering by purchasing investment stakes in slave-operated enterprises. The legal system depended on citizen juries who consistently ruled in favor of masters over slaves. These were not wealthy elites imposing their will from above. These were common citizens, craftsmen and farmers and merchants, who voted repeatedly to maintain and expand the torture system because it benefited them economically. Even the greatest minds of Athens provided intellectual justification for the system. Aristotle wrote extensively about the natural inferiority of enslaved peoples. He argued that some humans were born to serve others, that slavery was part of the divine order of the universe. His words gave philosophical respectability to systematic brutality. Plato designed his ideal society around slave labor. The Republic, his vision of perfect government, assumed that enlightened citizens would be supported by masses of enslaved workers. These philosophers did not oppose the system. They refined it, justified it, made it intellectually acceptable. Religious authorities sanctified the suffering. Temple priests declared that the gods approved of slavery, that Zeus himself had ordained the natural hierarchy that placed free men above enslaved women. Religious festivals celebrated the submission of slaves to their masters. Sacred texts were interpreted to support human bondage. The culture itself celebrated subjugation. Pottery paintings show enslaved women in chains, performing degrading acts for the entertainment of their masters. Theater productions featured slave characters as objects of ridicule and abuse. Art commissioned for public spaces depicted the conquest and enslavement of foreign women as glorious achievements. Children grew up seeing enslaved women beaten in the streets and learned that this was normal, natural, proper. They played games that mimicked slave auctions. They learned songs that celebrated their superiority over the enslaved. The next generation absorbed these lessons completely. This was not the work of a few cruel masters. This was not the aberration of a violent minority. This was the entire society, from the highest philosopher to the lowest citizen, participating in and profiting from a system built on human agony. Democracy in Athens meant the freedom of some to torture others. And everyone with citizenship shared in the profits. They never stopped fighting. Despite the chains, despite the whips, despite the certainty of death, enslaved women in Athens never accepted their fate. Their resistance took forms that masters could barely comprehend and could never fully suppress. Suicide became epidemic. Not isolated acts of despair, but coordinated campaigns of self-destruction that terrified the slave-owning class. Women would hang themselves with torn clothing, drown themselves in wells, throw themselves from rooftops. Some chose starvation, refusing all food until death claimed them. The economic impact was devastating. Masters who had invested thousands of drachmas in human property watched their assets destroy themselves rather than submit. Legal documents from the period show frantic attempts to prevent these deaths. Constant surveillance, removal of any objects that could be used for self-harm, forced feeding of women who refused to eat. But the suicides continued. They became a form of warfare. Every death was a victory against the system, a refusal to participate in their own exploitation. Masters began chaining women to prevent them from reaching high places or deep water. The chains only made the women more creative in their methods of escape. Sabotage campaigns struck at the heart of Athenian wealth. Women in textile workshops would deliberately damage expensive fabrics. They would break pottery after hours of careful work. They would contaminate food stores, ruin wine shipments, destroy tools and equipment despite knowing that discovery meant certain torture and death. The mining operations suffered constant sabotage. Support beams would mysteriously weaken. Equipment would disappear. Valuable silver ore would be contaminated with worthless stone. Each act of destruction cost masters enormous sums and proved that enslaved women retained the power to strike back. Secret communication networks operated throughout the city. Despite speaking different languages and coming from different cultures, enslaved women developed methods of sharing information. Hand signals, coded songs, messages hidden in everyday objects. They warned each other about brutal masters, shared survival techniques, planned coordinated resistance. These networks extended across household boundaries. Women working in different parts of the city found ways to communicate, to share intelligence, to support each other's acts of defiance. Masters never fully understood how information spread so quickly through the enslaved population, how plans formed seemingly without coordination. Escape attempts were rare but never ceased entirely. Most failed within hours. The punishment for attempted escape was so severe that few survived to try again. But some succeeded. A handful of women managed to reach friendly territory, to find passage on ships leaving Athens, to disappear into the mountains or foreign cities. Each successful escape became legend among the enslaved. Stories of women who had broken free, who had found freedom, who had proven that escape was possible. These stories spread through the secret networks, inspiring others to attempt the impossible. Then came 413 BCE. Athens had suffered a crushing military defeat in Sicily. Thousands of citizens were dead. The city's defenses were weakened. The enslaved population sensed opportunity. The uprising began in the silver mines at Laurium. 2,000 women broke their chains simultaneously. Word spread through the secret networks with impossible speed. Within hours, enslaved people across Athens were rising against their masters. 20,000 slaves joined the rebellion. Women from households, workshops, temples, and mines coordinated their attacks across the entire city. They seized weapons, freed other slaves, attacked their tormentors with years of accumulated rage. For 3 days, Athens teetered on the edge of complete collapse. Enslaved women who had been beaten and broken just days before suddenly commanded sections of the city. They executed masters who had tortured them. They freed thousands of their fellow slaves. They proved that the system could be overthrown. But the free citizens rallied. Troops returned from military campaigns. Reinforcements arrived from allied cities. The overwhelming numerical advantage of the enslaved could not compensate for their lack of weapons, training, and organization. The suppression was merciless. Weeks of mass executions followed. Thousands of women were crucified along the roads leading into Athens. Their bodies were left to rot as warnings to any who might consider future rebellion. The executions were public spectacles designed to terrorize the surviving enslaved population into absolute submission. The aftermath brought enhanced surveillance and punishment systems. New laws required constant monitoring of enslaved populations. Severe restrictions on movement and assembly. Collective punishment policies that held entire households responsible for individual acts of resistance. But the uprising had proven something that masters could never forget. Despite every form of torture, despite every method of control, despite every attempt to break their spirits, enslaved women retained the capacity for organized resistance. They remained dangerous. They remained unbroken. These brave women fought against impossible odds for basic human dignity. They risked everything for the chance at freedom. They faced torture and death rather than accept permanent submission. The least we can do is remember them. Subscribe to Throne of Lies and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Together we'll ensure their courage isn't forgotten. The greatest crime was not the torture itself. The greatest crime was making it disappear. Within generations of these horrors, the systematic erasure began. Ancient historians like Thucydides wrote thousands of pages about Athenian politics, military campaigns, and philosophical achievements. They devoted entire chapters to minor diplomatic disputes. But the systematic torture of 100,000 enslaved people, a few scattered sentences, brief mentions, casual footnotes. This was not accidental oversight. This was deliberate selection. These historians lived in the same city where women screamed in basement torture chambers. They walked past the scourging posts every day. They attended dinner parties where freshly branded slaves served wine. Yet they chose to write about everything except what they saw with their own eyes. Philosophical deflection became an art form. Writers like Plato and Aristotle constructed elaborate theories about justice, virtue, and the ideal society. They filled scrolls with discussions of democracy and freedom. Meanwhile, the very system that gave them leisure to write depended entirely on enslaved labor and systematic brutality. They never connected these dots. They actively avoided connecting them. Archaeological erasure followed quickly. Torture chambers were filled with rubble. Scourging posts were torn down. Mining tunnels were collapsed and sealed. Physical evidence was systematically destroyed by people who wanted future generations to remember Athens differently. The golden city had to remain golden. The dark foundations had to be buried. Modern academic complicity completed the cover-up. Today's textbooks devote chapters to Athenian democracy, philosophy, and cultural achievements. They mention slavery in passing, usually in a single paragraph that emphasizes how different ancient slavery was from modern versions. The systematic torture, the breeding programs, the industrial-scale human destruction. Omitted entirely. University curricula reflect these same priorities. Students can earn advanced degrees in ancient history without ever learning the specific details of how slavery operated in Athens. They study the Parthenon's architectural innovations but never learn it was built with silver extracted by tortured women in underground mines. They analyze Aristotle's political philosophy but never examine his detailed justifications for systematic human bondage. They memorize the names of Athenian generals and politicians but never learn the names of the enslaved women who suffered and died to support their achievements. Museum exhibitions present the sanitized version with professional polish. Gleaming marble sculptures and painted pottery dominate the displays. Interactive exhibits let visitors experience Athenian democracy. Audio tours describe the philosophical innovations and artistic achievements. But where are the chains? Where are the whips? Where are the branding irons that archaeologists have found in abundance? Stored in basement archives, away from public view. Museum curators have decided that visitors should see the beautiful objects, not the tools of torture that were equally common in ancient Athens. The gift shops sell replicas of Greek coins and miniature Parthenons. They do not sell replicas of slave collars, though these were manufactured in far greater quantities than coins. The sanitization is complete. The cover-up is total. This erasure serves modern purposes. It allows us to celebrate ancient Athens as the birthplace of democracy without confronting the reality that this democracy was built on systematic torture. It lets us admire Greek philosophy without acknowledging that these philosophers justified human bondage. It permits us to view the Parthenon as a monument to human achievement rather than a monument to human suffering. The women who died in those torture chambers have been murdered twice. Once by their masters, and again by the historians, academics, and museum curators who have systematically erased their existence from human memory. Their screams have been silenced not just by death, but by deliberate forgetting. But fragments survive. Legal documents that record punishments. Medical texts that describe torture techniques. Archaeological evidence that reveals the true scope of the system. The truth exists for those willing to search for it, to speak it, to remember the women who suffered and died in the shadows of marble columns. The cover-up continues today, but it does not have to succeed forever. The marble still stands. Tourists still marvel at the Parthenians' perfect columns. Students still learn that Athens gave the world democracy. But now you know the truth that lies beneath every stone. Athens was not built on noble ideals. It was built on bones. Human bones. The bones of women who died screaming in basement torture chambers while philosophers debated justice in marble halls above their heads. Democracy in Athens meant the freedom of some to systematically torture others. And the profits from that torture funded every temple, every statue, every monument that visitors admire today. The numbers tell the real story. Over 3 centuries of Athenian power, conservative estimates suggest that 2 million women passed through the slavery system. Most died from their injuries. Most were tortured repeatedly before death claimed them. Most were forgotten completely, their names lost, their stories buried, their suffering erased from human memory. But this history matters today. It matters because the same mechanisms that allowed an entire civilization to profit from systematic torture still exist. Economic systems that hide their true costs from those who benefit. Academic institutions that sanitize inconvenient truths. Cultural narratives that celebrate achievements while ignoring the suffering that made them possible. It matters because power structures still depend on the suffering of invisible people. Because torture still happens in hidden places. Because entire populations still disappear into systems designed to extract profit from human pain. The methods change. The geography shifts. But the fundamental dynamic remains the same. It matters because forgetting the victims allows the crimes to continue. Every time we celebrate ancient Athens without mentioning the tortured women who built it, we participate in the cover-up. We make ourselves complicit in the erasure. We ensure that similar horrors can happen again because we refuse to learn from the horrors that happened before. The women who died in those torture chambers cannot speak for themselves anymore. But their stories can still be told. Their suffering can still be remembered. Their courage can still inspire us to recognize similar patterns when they emerge in our own time. These women's screams echoed through marble halls while philosophers spoke of justice. Their blood stained the silver that funded the Golden Age. Their broken bodies built the democracy that historians still celebrate. Don't let their suffering be forgotten again. Join Throne of Lies and help us reach 1,000 subscribers who care about real history. Subscribe now and become part of a community dedicated to uncovering the brutal truths that power tries to bury. Together we can ensure that the voices of the forgotten are finally heard. Next week, we travel to medieval England to expose the horrific fate of peasant children sold into royal service. You think you know about medieval brutality? You know nothing yet. The truth about what happened in castle dungeons will shatter everything you believed about the age of chivalry. The lies end here. The truth begins now. This is Throne of Lies, where we tear away civilization's masks to reveal the blood beneath.